The city at night was a beast, a sprawling, glittering monster feeding on secrets. In a quiet, unassuming neighborhood far from the flashy main streets, a single apartment window offered the only light. Inside, a young woman named Nia sat perfectly still on her sofa, as if any movement would shatter the fragile silence. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. The kind of trouble that had found her family wasn't the kind you could talk your way out of. It was a deep, dark debt, a sum of money so large it was simply a frightening number, one that had brought shadows under her parents' eyes and a constant, cold fear into their home. The bad men had come again that afternoon. They hadn't shouted or broken things, which was somehow worse. They had simply laid out the facts in calm, chilling voices. The deadline was tomorrow. There were no more extensions, no more pleas to be heard. The options were simple: pay or face consequences that Nia's mind shied away from even picturing. Her father looked older than she had ever seen him. Her mother's gentle face was etched with a permanent look of worry. They were good people, simple people who had gotten caught in a web spun by someone far more powerful. It was her mother, through tears, who had whispered a name, a last resort, a dangerous, desperate hope: Yankee. He wasn't a man you went to for a loan. He was a man you went to for a solution, and his solutions were legendary and terrifying. He was the head of the most powerful Korean mafia group in the city. He operated in a world of shadows and violence, a world Nia had only ever seen in glimpses from her safe, ordinary life. The idea of approaching him was like offering yourself to a wolf to save yourself from a dog. But Nia was out of options. The love for her family was a physical ache in her chest, a fierce, protective flame that burned brighter than her own fear. So she had made the call. A deep, impersonal voice on the other end had given her an address and a time. No questions, no pleasantries. Now, sitting in the stillness of her apartment, the clock ticked relentlessly toward that meeting. When it was time, she dressed simply in a plain dress, as if trying to make herself invisible. The journey to the address was a blur. She was led into a building that was all sharp angles, cold marble, and silent, watchful men. They didn't speak to her, only gestured with their chins, their eyes scanning her as if assessing a threat, or more likely, a liability. She was shown into an office that was vast and minimalist. The air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and something else, something clean and sharp like antiseptic, which felt strange and out of place. And then he was there, younger than she had imagined, but the power that radiated from him filled the entire room. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He was still, his dark eyes taking her in with a single sweeping glance that felt more invasive than a touch. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply stood behind his large, empty desk, a king in his concrete castle. "Nia," he said. Her name sounded like a statement, not a question. His voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. She tried to speak, to explain her family's situation, but the words caught in her dry throat. He raised a hand, a small, effortless gesture that silenced her completely. "I know why you are here," he continued. "Your family's debt, the men they owe. It is a nuisance to him. The thing that was destroying her world was merely a nuisance. I can make it disappear," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I can make all of it go away. Your parents will be safe. They will want for nothing. Their life will return to normal." A wild, impossible hope began to flutter in Nia's chest. It was too good to be true. She knew with a sinking certainty what was coming next. "But there is a price," he said, confirming her fear. "It is not money. It is you." He explained the terms, his voice never changing its cool, even tone. She would marry him. It would be a business arrangement, a contract. She would live in his house, appear by his side when required, and be his wife in name. In return, her family's debt would be erased, and they would be set up with a new life, secure and comfortable forever under his protection. It was a deal, a transaction. He was buying her. Tears welled in Nia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked at this man, this stranger who held her family's future in his hands. He was handsome, but in the way a sharp, beautifully crafted knife is handsome. deadly and cold. Marrying him meant giving up her own life, her dreams, her freedom. It meant stepping into his world of shadows and never looking back. He waited, his expression unreadable. He wasn't asking. He was presenting the only path forward. Nia thought of her mother's smile, her father's laugh. She thought of the fear in their eyes being replaced by peace. The choice was agonizing, but it was also simple. Her love for them was the one thing the darkness of this situation couldn't touch. She took a shaky breath, her voice a fragile whisper in the vast, silent room. "Okay," she said. "I will do it. I will marry you." Yankee gave a single, slow nod. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction. It was just business. "The wedding will be tomorrow. Be ready." And with that, he turned away, dismissing her. The meeting was over. Her old life was over. She had just agreed to become the shy new wife of the most feared man in the city. And she had no idea what that would truly mean. The wedding was not a wedding. It was a transaction finalized in a stark, wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and lemon polish. There was no white dress, no music, no family smiling through tears. Nia wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress she had bought herself, feeling like an imposter in its fine fabric. Hyani stood beside her, a formidable presence in a tailored black suit, his posture rigid as he recited his vows in a voice that was clear, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. A man Nia didn't know, a lawyer and not a priest, presided over the brief ceremony. The only other witnesses were two of Hyani's men standing by the door like silent statues. When it was time to exchange rings, a plain gold band was placed on her finger. It was cool and heavy, a perfect symbol of her new life. A beautiful, precious, but inescapable weight. She placed a matching band on Hyani's finger, her hand trembling so slightly she hoped no one noticed. His skin was warm, a startling contrast to his icy demeanor. He did not look at her. The entire event lasted 12 minutes. Afterward, a sleek, black car with darkened windows carried them away from the city center. Hyani did not sit with her. He took the front passenger seat, leaving Nia alone in the vast, leather-scented silence of the back. She watched the bustling normal world fly by outside her window, feeling a profound and aching separation from it. She was no longer a part of that world. She was being transported to her new one. The car eventually passed through a set of immense wrought iron gates that swung open silently and then closed behind them with a definitive heavy thud. They traveled down a long, tree-lined driveway before the house came into view. It wasn't a house. It was a compound, a masterpiece of modern architecture. All sharp angles, gray stone, and immense panels of glass. It looked less like a home and more like a museum or a very beautiful, very secure prison. A stern-faced woman in her 50s, introduced as Mrs. Choi, the house manager, met her at the door. Hyani had already disappeared inside without a word. "I will show you to your room," Mrs. Choi said, her tone not unkind, but not warm either. It was the voice of pure efficiency. Nia followed her through the entrance hall, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. The interior was breathtaking and utterly soulless. Everything was shades of gray, black, and white. There were no family photos on the walls, no messy stacks of books, no personal touches of any kind. It was the opposite of her family's warm, cluttered, and loving apartment. Her new room was in a wing separate from the rest of the house. It was a large, beautiful suite with a comfortable bed, a sitting area, and a luxurious bathroom. A wall of glass looked out onto a meticulously maintained private garden. It had everything she could possibly need, and yet it felt completely empty. Her small suitcase, which one of the men had brought in, looked lonely and out of place in the vast space. The days began to blur into a strange, quiet routine. She would wake up, eat breakfast alone in the large, formal dining room while a server stood silently by the wall. She would wander the house, exploring its many rooms, always feeling like a ghost in someone else's space. She saw Hyani only in passing. Sometimes she would glimpse him walking to his home office, always accompanied by one or two of his men, his focus already elsewhere. Sometimes she would hear the low murmur of his voice from behind his closed office door, a sound that was both a reminder of his presence and a barrier to it. He had spoken the truth. He was using the marriage for his business. His men now referred to her as Mrs. Kim, with a respectful nod, a title that felt like a costume she was wearing. Her presence as his wife gave him an air of stability, of being a settled man, which was apparently valuable in his world. But to her he was a stranger. One evening, a week after she had arrived, she dared to venture near his office, drawn by the sound of his voice, which was raised in anger. She stood frozen in the hallway, listening to the sharp, clipped Korean, understanding none of the words, but all of the fury. When the door suddenly swung open, Hyani stood there, his eyes blazing. He saw her, and for a second his anger seemed to sharpen, focused on her. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I thought you might like some tea," Nia stammered, gesturing weakly with a cup she hadn't even realized she was holding. He looked from her face to the cup and back again, his expression unreadable. "I don't need tea," he said, and then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there foolish and alone, the warm cup doing nothing to fight the cold that was seeping deep into her bones. This was her life now. A beautiful, silent, lonely fortress with a husband who was more of a warden. The deal was done. Her family was safe, but the cost was every bit as heavy as she had feared. The silence in the house began to take on a weight of its own. It was a thick, heavy thing that filled the spacious rooms and made every small sound, the click of her heels on the floor, the rustle of her clothes, seemed too loud. Nia felt like she was living in a beautiful, airy bubble, floating through her days without purpose or connection. She spent hours in the garden, the only part of the property that felt somewhat alive, though even its perfection, every leaf and branch meticulously placed, reminded her of the controlled world she now inhabited. The memory of Hyani's anger at his office door lingered, a moment of sharp heat in the pervasive cold. She had retreated back to her room after that, humiliated. But a stubborn little seed of something, not quite courage, but perhaps a deep-seated need for human interaction, had been planted. She decided she would not just be a ghost. She would try to find small ways to exist within this new life, even if they were ignored. She started by spending time in the large, sterile kitchen when she knew the staff was on a break. Mrs. Choi had initially frowned upon it, but after seeing Nia meticulously clean up after herself, she had relented with a silent nod. Nia didn't know how to cook many fancy things, but she remembered the simple, comforting recipes from her mother's kitchen. One afternoon, she made a batch of sweet, crispy Korean pancakes, a food that had always filled her old home with warmth and noise. The act of mixing the batter, slicing the scallions, and frying them was a comforting ritual. She left a plate of them covered on the counter with a small note that simply read, "For anyone who is hungry." She didn't know if Hyani would ever see them, and she tried not to care. A few days later, she was reading in a sunlit alcove when she heard the front door open. It was one of Hyani's men, a tall, smirking man named June, who had always looked at her with a glint of disrespect in his eyes, as if she were a piece of furniture that was in his way. He was returning from an errand, and as he passed her, he didn't merely nod. He stopped, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "The little wife," he said, his voice a low sneer. "All alone again? The boss must find his business more interesting." He took a step closer, and Nia instinctively shrank back into her chair. "Maybe you need some company. I could keep you entertained while he's busy." Before Nia could even form a word, a voice colder than anything she had ever heard cut through the air from the hallway entrance. Hyani was standing there, having emerged from his office without a sound. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were like black ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The single word was a threat in itself. June spun around, his smirk instantly replaced by panic. "Boss, I pay you to work, not to speak to my wife," Hyani said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You will apologize to her now." June turned back to Nia, his face pale. "Mrs. Kim." I am sorry I spoke out of turn, he stammered. Hyani walked forward until he was standing directly between Nia and June. A physical wall of protection. Your apology is not accepted. Go to my office. Wait for me. He didn't watch June leave. His gaze was fixed on Nia, checking on her, assessing the fear that was still plain on her face. A few moments later, the sound of a furious one-sided argument came from the office, followed by a door slamming shut. June was never seen in the house again. That evening, Hyani found Nia in the garden. The night air was cool. He stood beside her for a long moment, both of them looking at the moonlit trees. He is gone, Hyani said finally. No one will speak to you like that ever. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost hesitant. My father, he was a trusting man. He saw the best in people. The trust was used. It got him killed. He didn't look at her as he said this, as if confessing to the night itself. It is not easy for me to let people in. It was the most he had ever said to her about himself. It wasn't an apology for his coldness, but it was an explanation. It was a crack in the fortress wall, a single, small window into the lonely man who lived inside. Nia didn't say anything. She simply nodded, understanding that for him, this was a monumental act of trust. The cold, empty house suddenly felt a fraction less lonely. The silent, fearsome mafia boss had, for the first time, shown her a piece of the man he truly was. The air in the house had undeniably shifted. It was not warm, not yet, but the oppressive, museum-like silence had been broken. Hyani began to appear at the dinner table. He still did not speak much, but his presence was no longer that of a distant warden. He would ask her simple, practical questions. Did Mrs. Choi have the gardener tend to your private garden? Or is the room to your liking? They were the questions of a host, not a husband, but they were a start. Nia, in turn, found her voice a little more each day. She would answer him, and sometimes she would even ask a question in return. Was your day busy? The question felt foolish, but he would give a short, honest answer. There are always disputes to settle. It was a strange, stilted dance, but they were learning the steps. A fragile sense of routine began to form. Nia, feeling bolder, asked Mrs. Choi if she could learn to make some of the traditional Korean dishes Hyani seemed to prefer. Mrs. Choi, her stern exterior softening by a degree, agreed to teach her. The kitchen, once a place of sterile silence, now sometimes held the warm, aromatic smells of garlic, ginger, and soy. Nia never knew if Hyani noticed, but the leftovers from her cooking lessons always seemed to disappear from the refrigerator. It was on a bright, sunny afternoon that this fragile new normal shattered. Nia had asked for, and been granted, permission to go shopping for some books and art supplies. It was her first time leaving the compound alone, a small taste of the freedom she had given up. A single bodyguard, a young, serious man named Miho, accompanied her, maintaining a respectful distance. For an hour, she felt almost like her old self, browsing through a bookstore. The simple pleasure of choosing a novel a profound joy. She was leaving the store, a small bag in her hand, when a large black van screeched to a halt at the curb. The side door slid open with a violent rush. Before she could even process what was happening, two men in dark masks jumped out and grabbed her. Her bag of books fell to the pavement. A scream was stifled in her throat by a gloved hand. She caught a glimpse of Miho, his hand flying inside his jacket, but he was tackled to the ground by a third man. The world became a blur of panic and brutal force. She was being hauled, kicking and twisting, toward the open door of the van. The reality of Hyani's world, a world she had only seen from the insulated safety of his house, was now upon her, and it was terrifying. This was the danger he lived with every day, and now it had her. Just as her feet left the ground, a new sound cut through the chaos. The roar of car engines, not one, but several. Two black sedans boxed in the van with jarring force. Doors flew open, and Hyani's men poured out. They moved with a precision and violence that was shocking. The fight was short, brutal, and efficient. The men who had grabbed her were suddenly on the ground, subdued. And then he was there. Hyani emerged from the lead car. He wasn't running, but his walk was a predator's stride, fast and deadly. His face was pale, a terrifying calm masking a fury that radiated from him like heat. He didn't look at his men or the subdued attackers. His eyes were only for her. He walked straight to her, and the man holding her instantly released his grip, stumbling backward in fear. Nia stood shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Hyani reached her. His hands came up, not to shake her or shout, but to frame her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. His eyes scanned her face, her arms, checking for injury. The mask of the cold mafia boss was completely gone. In its place was a raw, undisguised fear. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard from him before. She could only shake her head, tears starting to well in her eyes now that the immediate danger had passed. He let out a breath that was almost a shudder and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She could feel the frantic beat of his heart against her cheek. He held her like that for a long moment, right there on the sidewalk in front of everyone, his embrace a fortress in itself. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry." He didn't let go of her until he had personally guided her into the back of his car, settling her inside before getting in beside her. He kept her hand in his the entire drive home, his grip firm and anchoring. The man who had told her he would use her was gone. In his place was a man who had looked truly terrified at the thought of losing her. The world outside was still dangerous, but in the quiet of the car, holding his hand, Nia felt a strange, new kind of safety begin to bloom. The fortress was no longer a prison. After the failed kidnapping, the house transformed into a sanctuary. Hyani's protectiveness became a tangible, constant presence. More guards were posted, not just at the gates, but discreetly throughout the grounds. Yet for Nia, the most significant change was not in the security, but in the man himself. The wall he had built around himself, the one made of ice and silence, had developed a permanent crack the moment he pulled her from danger. He started seeking her out. It began with small things. He would find her reading in the alcove and ask about her book. His questions were no longer just polite. They were curious. He began to eat every meal with her, the long dining table feeling less vast with him sitting at the other end. The conversations were still careful, like two people testing the ice on a frozen lake. But they were real. He told her about the pressures of his work, not the violent details, but the weight of responsibility, the constant need for strategy. She, in turn, told him about her life before. Her love for art, her quiet dreams of being an illustrator, the simple joy of her family's noisy dinners. One rainy afternoon, she ventured into a part of the house she had always avoided, the west wing which held his private rooms. The door to one room was slightly ajar. Pushing it open gently, she gasped. It was not an office or a bedroom. It was a studio flooded with gray, rainy light from a large skylight. Canvases were stacked against the walls, and the air was thick, amidst the familiar, comforting scent of turpentine and oil paint. The paintings weren't what she anticipated. They weren't dark or violent. Instead, they were landscapes, mostly serene mountains, misty forests, and peaceful rivers, rendered with a skill and depth of feeling that stole her breath. This was his secret heart, the refuge where the mafia boss vanished and the artist emerged. He found her there later, standing transfixed before a painting of a tranquil lake at dawn. He didn't appear angry, but almost shy. "My mother," he said quietly from the doorway, making her jump. "She was a painter. She taught me. It's the only thing that quiets the world for me." From that day forward, they began to share their quiet worlds. He would sometimes sit with her in the garden while she sketched, the silence between them now a comfortable and warm presence. One evening, following a particularly tense day for him, he guided her to the rooftop terrace. The city lights sprawled beneath them like a fallen carpet of stars. The air was cool and clean. "When I made that deal with you," he began, his voice low, "I thought I was simply securing a business advantage, a stable image." He turned to face her, his dark eyes serious in the dim light. I told myself you were just part of the arrangement, that I could keep you separate. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't dare speak. But when I saw that van, when I thought they had taken you, he shook his head, the raw memory of his own fear etched on his face. I realized you weren't separate from my life at all. You've become the most important part of it. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The tender touch sent a shiver dancing down her spine. His hand then cupped her jaw, his thumb softly stroking her skin. The space between them evaporated, charged with a tension that had been simmering for weeks. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to retreat. She didn't. She rose onto her toes to meet him. Their first kiss wasn't rushed or desperate. It was a slow, tender exploration, a silent conversation that spoke volumes beyond the reach of words. It was a promise and an apology, a question and an answer all in one. When they finally parted, resting their foreheads together, the cold, businesslike agreement of their marriage had vanished, burned away by a warmth that felt more real than anything Nia had ever known. The mafia boss and his shy wife were fading away, and in their place, something new and fragile was tentatively beginning to grow, reaching for the light. The weeks that followed that rooftop kiss were a time of profound, quiet transformation. The house was no longer merely a collection of cold, beautiful rooms. It became their home, infused with a sense of belonging. Kyunki's studio door was now always open to her. She would sit and sketch while he painted, the comfortable silence between them filled with the soft scratch of her charcoal and the gentle swish of his brush. He even began to teach her how to paint with oils, his large, capable hands gently guiding hers, showing her how to mix colors to capture the precise shade of the evening sky. In the evenings, they would talk for hours, curled up together on the large sofa in the living room. He told her stories about his mother, a gentle soul who had filled his childhood with art and music, a stark contrast to the brutal world his father inhabited. Nia, in turn, shared her own fears and hopes, her lifelong dream of one day illustrating children's books, a dream he listened to with genuine interest, not dismissive condescension. The love that had begun as a fragile spark was now a steady, warm flame, burning away the last of the lingering shadows between them, illuminating their shared space. It was this newfound happiness, this blossoming connection, that made the subsequent betrayal all the more devastating, a cruel twist of fate. The trouble began suddenly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. A safe house was discovered by rival factions, its location compromised. A shipment of legitimate goods, a business he was using to establish a clean front, was seized by the authorities on a carefully orchestrated tip. A key financial deal, crucial to his operations, fell apart at the last moment due to leaked, sensitive information. Each setback was a precise, calculated strike, designed to inflict maximum damage. Each one cost Hyunki money, power, and, most dangerously, the trust of his closest allies. It was clear that there was a traitor in their midst, someone with intimate knowledge of his operations, someone on the inside who was deliberately sabotaging him. The suspicion, inevitably, fell on the newest and most vulnerable person in his inner circle, Nia. The whispers among his men started, quiet at first, then growing steadily louder, fueled by doubt and paranoia. She was the outsider, the newcomer. She had been forced into the marriage against her will. Who had more reason to want to hurt him, to see him brought down? Hyunki fought against the insidious rumors, fiercely defending her. His loyalty to her was a stubborn, unwavering force. But the pressure mounted with each new incident. His most senior advisors, men who had been with him for years, presented him with what they considered compelling circumstantial evidence. The timing of a suspicious phone call, a vague sighting of her near one of the compromised locations. It was flimsy at best, but in his world, suspicion was often enough to condemn a person. The confrontation took place in his office, the air thick with unspoken tension and accusation. His trusted lieutenant, a man named Sung, who had been like an uncle to Hyunki since childhood, laid out the accusations with a tone of grave disappointment, as if he were mourning the loss of something precious. Hyunki, his face a mask of conflicting emotions and simmering anger, finally turned to Nia, who had been summoned to stand before them, facing their collective judgment. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice strained, the words seeming to tear themselves from his throat. The coldness she hadn't seen in weeks was back in his eyes, but now it was mixed with a profound, heartbreaking hurt. "Did you betray me, Nia? Was this all a plan?" The accusation struck her with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. She looked at the man she had fallen deeply in love with, the man who had held her so gently and shared his most secret self with her, and saw doubt, a flicker of uncertainty that cut deeper than any blade. The pain of it was sharper, more excruciating than any fear she had ever felt in her life. The shy, timid girl she had once been would have crumbled under the weight of such an accusation. But the woman she had become, the woman he had inadvertently helped her to be, stood her ground, refusing to be broken. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision, but her voice was steady, clear, and strong as it rang out in the tense room. "How can you even ask me that?" she said, her gaze locked on his, unwavering in its intensity. "Do you honestly think, after everything, after all we've shared, that I could do something like that to you?" She took a step forward, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. "You told me your father was killed by betrayal. Do you think I am like them? I could never intentionally hurt you. I love you, Hyunki." The raw, public declaration of her love hung in the air, silencing the murmurs and the hushed whispers that had been swirling around the room. Hyunki stared at her, his doubt warring with the undeniable love he felt for her, tearing him in two. In that charged, breathless silence, Sung, seeking to drive the final nail into Nia's coffin, spoke up, his voice smooth and deceptively reasonable. "Boss, her family was in debt. Our enemies could have easily paid her to do this." But as he spoke, his hand gestured a little too broadly, a little too carelessly, and his sleeve rolled up, revealing a sleek, expensive watch, a limited edition model that Hyunki instantly recognized. It was the same watch he had seen on the wrist of the leader of the rival faction in a surveillance photo just days before. A gift, a bribe, a payment for services rendered. Time seemed to freeze, the moment suspended in a thick, suffocating silence. Hyunki's eyes snapped from the incriminating watch to Sung's face, his gaze piercing. The older man's confident expression faltered for a fraction of a second, just a flicker of hesitation, but it was enough. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity, revealing the ugly truth. It was Sung, the trusted uncle, the man who had been closest to his father, the one he had always confided in, who had been feeding information to their enemies, carefully framing Nia, and systematically trying to destroy him from within. The betrayal from Nia would have been devastating, a wound to the heart. But this betrayal, from a man he considered family, was a deeper, more poisonous wound, a venom that seeped into his very soul. All the anger and hurt he had mistakenly directed at Nia now focused on its true target, burning with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The look on Hyunki's face was one of pure, unadulterated fury, a storm of rage unleashed. The traitor had been found, and he was standing right there in the room, exposed and vulnerable. The real battle, the one that would determine his fate, was about to begin. The revelation of Sung's betrayal exploded through the office with the force of a violent detonation, shaking the very foundations of their world. The air, once thick with suspicion aimed at Nia, now crackled with a far more dangerous and immediate energy, charged with the promise of retribution. Hyunki's face, which had been a mask of conflicted pain and agonizing doubt, hardened into something ancient and ruthless, a mask of pure, unadulterated vengeance. The man who painted serene landscapes, the artist who sought solace in beauty, was gone, replaced entirely by the MAFIA boss who had built his empire on the ashes of his father's shattered trust. "Sung," he said, his voice low and menacing, a single-worded death sentence. In a flash, the room descended into controlled chaos, a whirlwind of brutal efficiency. Sung, realizing that his deception had been exposed and his game was over, made a desperate lunge for a hidden weapon, a last-ditch attempt to salvage the situation. But Hyunki was faster, more ruthless, his movements honed by years of violence and survival. He moved with a brutal efficiency that was terrifying to witness, a force of nature unleashed. The fight was short, vicious, and decisive. When it was over, Sung was disarmed and pinned to the ground by two of Hyunki's most loyal men, his face a bloody mess of shame and defiance. Hyunki stood over him, his chest heaving, not from exertion, but from the sheer, gut-wrenching pain of the betrayal, the profound sense of loss that threatened to consume him. "My father treated you like a brother," Hyunki whispered, his voice dangerously low, laced with a venomous anger. "I treated you like a father, and this is how you repay us?" He gave a sharp, disgusted jerk of his head. His eyes filled with contempt. "Take him to the holding room. I will deal with him myself later." The moment the door closed behind the struggling Sung, the atmosphere in the room shifted once again, transforming in an instant. The fierce energy of the confrontation drained from Hyunki, leaving behind a profound exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness, and a deep, aching shame that settled heavily upon his shoulders. He turned slowly to face Nia. She was still standing where she had made her brave declaration of love, her body trembling slightly, the tears she had bravely held back now streaming silently down her face, tracing paths through her makeup. He crossed the room to her, each step heavy with the weight of his mistake, the burden of his doubt. He didn't try to offer excuses, to justify his actions. He simply stopped before her, his proud head bowed in contrition. "Nia," he began, his voice rough and raw, stripped bare of all its usual power and authority. I have no words. I accused you. I doubted you. After you gave me nothing but your honesty and your unwavering faith in your heart, I became the very thing I promised myself I would never be." He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a vulnerability she had only seen fleeting glimpses of before, a chink in his armor. "I do not deserve your forgiveness. The deal we made is void, null and void. You are free, completely free. You can leave this life, leave me, and I will ensure that you and your family want for nothing, for the rest of your days. It is the least I can do to atone for my mistake." Nia listened, her heart aching not from the sting of the accusation, but from the sheer, raw sorrow in his voice, the genuine remorse that poured out of him. He was offering her the freedom she had once craved above all else, the escape she had desperately longed for. But as she looked at him, this powerful, broken man offering to let her go because he believed it was what she deserved, she knew with absolute certainty that she didn't want it. Her freedom was no longer a place away from him, a life separate from his. It was standing by his side, facing whatever challenges lay ahead together, as a team. She reached out and took his hands, her touch gentle but firm, offering comfort and support. "Hyunki," she said softly, her voice filled with love and unwavering conviction. "Look at me." He raised his eyes to meet hers, searching her face for any sign of judgment or resentment. "You asked me if I betrayed you, and I told you the truth. I love you. That hasn't changed, and it never will." She took a step closer, bridging the distance between them. "You made a deal for a wife, but you earned my love. Not through power or fear, but by showing me the man you truly are inside. The man who protects, who creates beauty, who is learning to trust again." She squeezed his hands, her grip conveying all the emotions she couldn't express in words. "I am not leaving. This is my home now. You are my home." For a long moment, Hyunki simply stared at her, as if he couldn't quite believe her words, as if he were afraid he was dreaming. Then, a shudder ran through him, a tremor that shook him to his very core. He sank to his knees before her, a gesture of complete surrender, of profound gratitude, wrapping his arms tightly around her waist and pressing his forehead against her. "I love you, Nia," he murmured against her. The words a vow, a confession, a plea. "I love you so much. Our marriage started as a deal, but I want it to be real. I want it to be for love and nothing else. Please stay with me. Be my wife, for real, with all my heart." Nia smiled through her tears, her hands stroking his hair, offering comfort and reassurance. "I already am," she whispered, her voice filled with tenderness and unwavering love. The final confrontation with the rival gang, now leaderless and thoroughly confused without Sung's inside information and guidance, was swift and decisive. Hyunki, with a clear head and a united team, dismantled their operations within a matter of days, systematically taking down their network. The threat was finally completely eliminated, ensuring their safety. Weeks later, a real wedding ceremony was held in the private garden Nia had come to love and cherish. This time, it was filled with flowers, music, and the smiling faces of her family and Hyunki's most loyal friends. A celebration of love and unity. There were no business contracts, no cold exchanges of vows, no hidden agendas. As they stood beneath a canopy of blossoms, exchanging new rings and promises spoken from the heart, the last remnants of their painful beginning vanished, fading into the past like a distant, unpleasant memory. The MAFIA boss and his shy wife were gone forever, transformed by the power of love. In their place stood Hyunki and Nia, two people who had found love in the most unlikely of places. A love that was not a deal, but a conscious choice, stronger and more real than any enemy or any past hurt. Their story was just beginning, a testament to the enduring power of love and the possibility of finding light in the darkest of corners. If you were swept away by the incredible journey of Hyunki and Nia, from a cold business arrangement to a passionate and enduring love story, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe to the channel for more unique and captivating romance stories that explore the deepest corners of the human heart, filled with drama, passion, and unforgettable characters. A whole new world of captivating narratives is just a click away.